Hi guys, welcome and who dat? I'm Joe and I am here to bring you the wrap up final video for our beloved bless you boys in black and gold, the New Orleans Saints. A bookend on the 2022 NFL season that most of us would like to forget. We technically finished third in our division of four. NFC South, you had the winner, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going 8-9, and everybody else going 7-10. Carolina finishes second due to their better divisional record, and the Saints finished third because we beat Atlanta head-to-head twice. So here we are, lowly O Saints, 7-10. We don't have that many losing seasons in the last 18 years or so. Just a handful of them, and this is one of them, and it's going to sting. A lot of people hate the offense. Defense finished strong. There was a time when the defense was struggling early on in the season. So a lot of blame to go around, and this video will include my overall opinion of how the season turned out. But we're going to look at some stats as well. And let's pull those stats up, starting with the quarterbacks. Here we go, final stats. Andy Dalton, 252 out of 378. That is a completion percentage of 66.7. He threw for 2,871 yards. He did all this in 14 games out of 17. Average of 205.1 yards per game. That is awful. But if you're a great running team, then those numbers are to be expected from the quarterback. We weren't an overall great running team this year, and Andy Dalton could not provide the huge play or exhibit the ability to come back, be the guy you can lean on if you need to come back in a game. He finishes with 18 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He was sacked 25 times. Now, we're going to focus on Andy Dalton for a second before we look at anybody else. Andy Dalton, 66.7 completion percentage. Now, we've had Drew Brees for the last 15 years, except for last year and then this year. So for 15 years in a row, Drew Brees had a 20-year career in the NFL. Of those 20 years, Drew Brees finished with a completion percentage worse than 66.7 in 8 of those 20 years. Granted, 5 of them with the Chargers before he ever got to the Saints, but when he was with the Saints, there were 3 seasons where his completion percentage was not as good as this. Drew Brees is a much better quarterback than Andy Dalton, for sure. What I'm trying to say is 66.7% is pretty good in this league. It's the lack of ability to get the ball down the field consistently, and when you look at the final numbers, his average yards per attempt aren't that far off of what's average in this league. You know, we want something special, and people think if we get that first-round draft pick or a high draft pick in the draft that we're going to be able to go and grab that quarterback that's going to make all the difference in the world. Drew Brees is a once-in-a-lifetime guy, and you take the good with the bad. So a lot of people's complaints with Dalton was he was too conservative. And at 66.7% completion percentage, that's one thing you can point at and say, that's where being conservative is beneficial. And having a touchdown to interception differential of 18-9 is an indication as well. You were conservative, but you didn't turn the ball over that much. Now let's look at Jameis Winston. 73 out of 115, percentage of 63.5%, which Drew Brees was never that low in any season in his career. James had 858 yards, an average of 286 yards per game. A huge difference from Andy Dalton. But the attempts is also huge. In 3 games, Jameis Winston attempted 115 passes. And I remember 2 of those games. He was 25 out of 40 in one game, and he was 25 out of 41 in another game. Andy Dalton never attempted more than 40 passes in any of the games he played in. And there was obviously a change of what we were going to do with Andy Dalton at quarterback. But I think running the ball should be a staple no matter who your quarterback is. It only opens up everything. For Jameis Winston to have 115 attempts in 3 games with a broken back and foot and everything else is just absurd to me. Of course, he had 286 yards per game. He was throwing the ball 40 times a game. He finishes with 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Now, Jameis was hurt. So, and there's a chance that someone gets better and better as they play in the system and throughout the season, especially with his health. So it's unfair for me to look at these numbers and project, but I'm going to anyway, because that's what you do in these season end videos. You wonder what could have been. And if I multiply these numbers by 5, we'll have a 15 game sample, which is close to 17, and I don't want to overdo it here. But he would have thrown for over 4,000 yards. He would have had 20 touchdowns. He would have had 25 interceptions. That's all unfair projection. He was sacked 11 times in these 3 games, which means he would have been sacked at least 55 times. And Dalton was sacked 25 times. I know I said this is unfair, but to me, that's probably a real close indication to what the truth would have been. Because Jameis held on to the ball for 5 seconds every play. If the deep shot wasn't there, he didn't know. It seemed like he didn't know where to go with the ball next. And he was allergic to dumping it off to Kamara. So that's why your completion percentage is 63%, and that's why you were sacked 11 times. We played the same 3 teams with Andy Dalton, and he didn't get sacked 11 times in those 3 games. Dalton had his chance to play against the Panthers, the Falcons, and the Bucks. And with a patchwork offensive line, I might add, a lot of the times Dalton was out there. So being conservative, getting rid of the ball fast, knowing where to go with the ball, utilizing your running backs, being conservative, all of that is not a negative. If you're a defensive team, your defense is playing good. But you have to end those long drives with scores. You can't be missing field goals. You can't be turning the ball over. You can't be failing in the red zone like we did over and over again this season. So overall, yes, Jameis Winston would have thrown the ball 600 times. He would have thrown for 4,000 yards plus. He may have had more than 20 touchdowns. He may have been 25 touchdowns. But I think the interceptions would have been up there, 20 interceptions, something like that. And we wouldn't have been running the ball. There would have been an ability to come from behind, like he shows he can. We would have been way better in the red zone with Jameis Winston. But I just don't know how many points we would have scored ultimately, because you look at the sample size and there wasn't that many points. Now, our offense struggled late in the season under Andy Dalton, and we weren't scoring that many points then either. There was a sweet spot there in the middle, though, where we were scoring some points, and our defense was just allowing too much. I'm going to talk about those defensive stats in a second. Let's pull up the running backs. Now, here's where I think our identity was. And overall, it was okay, but it wasn't as good as it needed to be. We allowed, on average, 130 rushing yards against us every game. And that's where we should have been averaging, is around 135, 140 yards a game. We were averaging against us 130 yards a game, and we were getting about 116. So we weren't getting as much as we needed to. And I believe a lot of that is play calling. A lot of that is not knowing what to do with Kamara, not knowing what to do with Taysom Hill in the red zone, never using Taysom Hill. I mean, when we did, it worked. And when we did, it was effective. And using Kamara in the red zone was effective a lot of the times. And there were a lot of games when we just refused to do that. A lot of games when we were passing 4 times with Andy Dalton in the red zone, it just didn't make sense to me. But here's your running back numbers. Alvin Kamara, 223 carries, 897 yards, 2 touchdowns. He fumbled twice. I think he fumbled more than that, but that's what the stats said. I went to ESPN.com. 2 touchdowns rushing for the season. It's awful for Kamara. He had a 6-touchdown game last year against the Vikings. And this past season, he can only manage 2 for the season. That's not knowing how to utilize Kamara. He averaged 4 yards a carry. It's not bad. I'd like Kamara to be somewhere between 4.3 and 4.5. I would love for him to be a 1,000-yard rusher. I would love for him to have 10 touchdowns because, he's our star running back and he's a special player. And he was relatively healthy this season. So these numbers to me are a reflection of both our inability to use Kamara correctly, coupled with Kamara just having a below average season for what we are used to from him. Now, Taysom Hill, 96 carries, 575 yards, 7 touchdowns, and he did fumble once. I'm sure he fumbled more than that. But I like going to ESPN.com instead of NewOrleansSaints.com, because NewOrleansSaints.com doesn't have the stats up fast enough. They don't have the changes fast enough. And ESPN did throughout the season. So 6 yards a carry for Hill. This is great. We used him in a way that was beneficial a lot. We just didn't do it as much as I think we really should have, especially in the red zone. Hill was an effective passer as well. I didn't talk about those passing stats when I had them up, but here's Hill passing. 13 of 19, 240. Completion percentage of 68.4. They only had 19 attempts, but Hill did great. That's great. It's better than being 25% completion. 2 touchdowns. He was sacked twice. Those are the stats on Hill, and I believe he should have passed the ball probably 10 more times, 20 more times. I think it should have been half of our offense, especially with Jameis not being our starter. And the fact that it was working so well. So back to the running stats. Hill had 2 touchdowns passing, 7 touchdowns rushing. He also had 2 touchdowns receiving. So that's 11 touchdowns total, and that leads the team. Even Kamara doesn't come close. Kamara had 2 receiving touchdowns, so Kamara had a total of 4 touchdowns. Hill has a total of 11. Spoiler alert, I believe Taysom Hill was the MVP of the season. And I believe if we would have utilized him more in the red zone, I got to get that, guys. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. So back to the running game. Mark Ingram, 62 carries, 233 yards, an average of 3.8 yards a carry, 1 touchdown. It said 1 fumble. I know he fumbled at least twice. Ingram was okay. There were times when he was pretty effective, and then there were some games when he wasn't very effective, and then he got hurt. So his ability to be our reliable third back, second back, that didn't work out. Probably carried his last ball for the Saints. Latavius Murray, Murray present, 11 carries, 57 yards in one game. He manages as many touchdowns as Ingram did. And, yeah, we know what happened with Murray after that. Rashid Shaheed rounds it out, 4 carries, 57 yards, and a touchdown. I thought Shaheed should have been utilized more. I thought motion should have been utilized more. Play action should have been utilized more. We were a very unimaginative offense this year. And we had injuries across the offensive line throughout the year, which hampered our ability to run as well. But overall, it was okay. I appreciated the effort to focus on the running game for the most part. We had to, due to our lack of firepower on the passing side. But we managed to stay in most games. Most games were pretty close. We finished the year averaging 19.4 points a game, allowing 20.3. So that is almost 1 point differential. So on average, we lost every game 20-19. Now you have a great defense, a really good running game, an efficient passing game. You can win these games. We can score 20 points. We can allow less than 20 points. Then we're winning these games instead of losing them. But overall, that's how it turned out. The offense wasn't good enough at 19 points a game, and the defense wasn't good enough at 20 points a game. Now, 20 points a game isn't horrible for your defense. Great defenses will allow less than that. When we had our run there at the end, we were allowing less than 20 points a game. We were allowing very few points. But, we had to allow a bunch there in the middle. Giving up 42 to Arizona, right? And 28 to Minnesota. And even Seattle got us for a ton of points, and we barely won that game. Giving up 27 to Baltimore. I mean, the defense wasn't always perfect. Let's look at the receiving stats. For our beloved, bless you boys, Chris Olave ends up leading the team with 72 catches on 119 targets. 1,042 yards, 4 touchdowns. They say he fumbled twice. I'm sure he fumbled more than that. 72 catches for 1,000 yards. To me, the pro level you're looking at that you need to be a productive receiver is 70 catches for over 1,000 yards. And, you'd like to have between 6 and 10 receiving touchdowns. I mean, if you're going to be the leading receiver, 10 touchdowns is kind of like a benchmark for me. It's tough to get that record-breaking year that Michael Thomas had in yards and receptions. I believe he only had 9 touchdowns that year. So, 4 touchdowns. If Olave could have gotten the end zone a couple of more times, then he would have probably ended up on that Offensive Rookie of the Year list. But overall, 72 catches, 1,000 yards, it's a great season for a rookie. It just sucks that had to be our leading receiver. Because Michael Thomas was the guy that was supposed to be our leader, and Jarvis Landry, in all honesty, should have been our number 2 receiver. It didn't work out that way. Juwan Johnson at tight end is next on the list. This list is in order of yards. Johnson had 42 catches for 508 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. He led the team in receiving touchdowns. On 65 targets, 42 catches, Johnson was a standout this year, especially at the tight end position. It's a great year. It's probably he probably could have had 10 more catches, 15 more catches. But overall, we don't get a lot out of the tight end from the Saints in recent years. So this looks like a nice building block for the Saints. Alvin Kamara, 57 catches, 490 yards, 2 touchdowns, 77 targets, 57 catches. We like to see Kamara have between 60 and 80 catches. I don't think he would have had this many catches if Winston would have been our quarterback. I'm positive he wouldn't have. But at the same time, it's still not quite enough. I expect Kamara to have 1,000-yard rushing and at least 500 yards receiving. He didn't get the 1,000-yard rushing mark. He almost got the 500 receiving mark, but overall, not bad. And, pretty productive, being third on the team in catches. Well, these are the only 3 players that caught more than 50 balls. Olave, Johnson, Kamara. Again. Okay, so everybody else after that, less than 30 catches. Rashid Shaheed, the big breakout year. He gets to get involved in the middle of the season to the end. He gets 28 catches for 488 yards. Big play waiting to happen every time. 2 touchdowns. I believe he fumbled once. 34 targets, 28 catches. That's pretty good. Only 6 incompletions towards him. And going with along with the 4 rushes. Shaheed showed that he can play in this league, and he should have been utilized more early on when he first started to get involved. It was a slow process. His first 2 touches result in 2 touchdowns, but yet, he doesn't become a focal point of the offense until late in the season. But, he's a smaller guy, so I think going into every game with just Olave and Rashid is not a great idea, and Johnson. I believe we still need another receiver, a bigger guy. Not sure if that would be Traquan Smith or not. Finishes with 19 catches on 27 targets, 278 yards, and a touchdown. Traquan Smith was injured a lot, as usual. He was inconsistent as usual. But he did accumulate a lot of yards on just 19 catches. Jarvis Landry, big disappointment for me. His injury early on just kept him from being productive. 25 catches on 39 targets, 272 yards, 1 touchdown. I thought Jarvis Landry could have led the team in catches when this season first started, and it didn't work out. He was only under a 1-year contract, so we'll see if we retain him or not. But, he managed to play in a lot of these games late. He just wasn't very effective, and I'm assuming it had something to do with the injury. And at his age, I'm not sure what he has left. Adam Troutman, who battled an injury as well, ends up with 18 catches on 22 targets, 207 yards, and a touchdown. When we did go to Troutman, it worked. Only 4 incompletions his way. We just didn't throw the ball to him a lot. He didn't get as much playing time as Johnson, especially in those passing situations. And we were hoping Troutman would turn into this great all-around tight end, and I think as a receiver, he's okay. As a run blocker, he's pretty good. But he's not going to be the complete guy. It's hard to get a complete guy. And Juwan Johnson's getting better as a run blocker, but he is definitely a liability as a run blocker. He's a great receiver. So Troutman overall, we thought this season was going to be the season to show whether he was going to turn that corner or not, and, he loses his starting job. But he's still a solid guy. Michael Thomas, now he only played in 2.5, 3 games, but he has 16 catches on 22 targets, 171 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Those 3 touchdowns in 3 games. Just imagine if he could have stayed healthy and stayed in the game, how different a lot of this would have been. I mean, you got to project that he would have caught 15 touchdowns if he'd have kept this up. He would have he would he would have probably been in the Pro Bowl, and we'd have probably won a bunch of games, and he would have been the guy you go to when you're trying to come back. And Chris Olave wouldn't be double teamed. Thomas would be drawing the attention. Kamara would have more open reads. I mean, Thomas would have made such a big difference, I believe, overall in this season, as far as missing a player and having that be detrimental. Missing Marshawn Lattimore for 8 games or more hurt, but our depth was so good that we managed to turn a corner, and our passing defense was performing at a high level without Marshawn Lattimore. Our passing offense was never at a high level, and so I believe missing Michael Thomas was the biggest miss, player we missed the most in this season. Those 3 touchdowns in 3 games is proof in the pudding right there. Marcus Callaway, what a drop off. 16 catches on 32 targets, 158 yards and a touchdown. Callaway had to be our leading receiver last year, and then this season he couldn't even get on the field, and we struggled with injuries. Without Thomas, without Jarvis Landry for a long time, Callaway could not step up and prove that, that's how bad we were in Sean Payton's last year when Callaway's your leading receiver. I mean, Callaway is a very good pro player for an undrafted guy. And he showed he could make plays in a pinch. I don't know if the new coaching staff has something to do with this drop-off, but there was a drop-off. And then, of course, Taysom Hill, who was supposed to be a tight end, and in the end, he only gets 9 catches for 77 yards. He scores 2 touchdowns as a receiver. That's your receiving stats. So overall, for the Saints, I'm going to pull up a few more stats here. Yeah, we allow 20 points a game. We score 19. Talked about that. Our third down percentage, as far as defense goes, not too bad. We're only allowing 41%, but we're only converting 40%. You'd like to hold your team to about 33, 35%. So defense wasn't great. It's just like a blah, kind of like when you're on offense and you're only getting that much blah. Sacks allowed, we were sacked a total of 38 times, and our defense got 48 sacks. 48 sacks is really good. Really good. Those numbers are Dome Patrol numbers. Now, people remember the Dome Patrol as being this dominant force, and they were really good, but the defense that got the most sacks for the Saints were the Swamp Dogs in 2000, 2001, that era. We had a season with 66 sacks with that great Swamp Dog defense. That defensive line was the big difference there. 66 sacks is insane. I think the most the Dome Patrol ever got was about 56, 58 sacks. And they broke into the 50 sack range a couple of times during the Dome Patrol's reign, but they pretty much plateaued, averaged about 48 sacks a season, and that's what we got with our defense this year. So just to put it all in perspective for you, getting 48 sacks is pretty good. Allowing 38 is not very good. But we had injury problems on the offensive line. So net passing, 217 yards a game. That's just not going to cut it. We allowed 184 passing yards a game. That is great. That is the reason why games were as close as they were. We were able to make a team ineffective when they were trying to come back, except for Tom Brady, and Joe Burrow. But overall, our passing defense was very good. Rush defense, not so good. Allowing 130 yards a game is the reason why I can't put all of the blame on our offense. Our defense, allowing 130 rushing yards a game, it keeps teams in the game. It keeps them in control of the flow of the game. And that's how we were supposed to be built. We were supposed to have time of possession control. We were supposed to have all of the rushing yards. And instead, we allowed other teams to do that to us. It's demoralizing when you can't stop a team that's just chose to run and runs the ball up and down the field on you. A lot of the wins the Saints had late, that three-game winning streak, we were still allowing a ton of rushing yards. The problem was those teams decided not to run the ball. They decided to run the ball. It was working, but then they decided to pass again. And the games were too close for them to be, making those kind of errors coaching-wise. So, yeah, overall, I think our record could have been much worse. And it had a lot to do with the run defense. Pass defense does great. It kind of all balances out. And that final stat that I wanted to highlight here, field goals. We were 23 of 31, and that sucks to miss 8 kicks. Morton Anderson used to average missing 6, 7, 8 kicks a season. I'm used to it. I'm not giving up on our field goal kicker, but Will Lutz is going to be here for a while, hopefully. Maybe we get him cheaper in the next contract. But teams that played us converted 32 of 35 field goals. That just hurts. I mean, were we playing the greatest kickers of all time this season? I mean, when you average losing every game by 1 point, and then you see that they kicked 32 field goals against us, only missed 3. Yeah, that stat sucks. Okay, let's bring up the defensive stats now. And I'm just there's a lot of them here, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. Demario Davis leads the team in tackles with 109. He had 6.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 6 passes defensed, an interception, a fumble recovery. Demario Davis leads the team. Probably our defensive MVP because he stayed healthy throughout the whole season. And right there, nipping on his heels is Tyrann Mathieu, the much maligned, but overall very effective safety for the Saints. 91 tackles. He had a sack. He had 3 tackles for loss, 8 passes defensed, 3 interceptions, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Tyrann Mathieu was all over the field. Our defensive struggles early on and towards the early middle of the season when we were allowing a lot of points and it looked like we couldn't stop anybody at times. I felt like it was the safeties trying to get this defense down and for everything to start to click. And Marcus May kept missing a lot of time. And Mathieu was just out there being tried in different positions and trying different things. And, it was kind of like an experiment. And overall, I think Tyrann Mathieu graded out pretty good for the team when it was all said and done. When you had a healthy May and Mathieu toward the end of the season, things seemed to be clicking a lot better. But you knew there were going to be bumps in the road as far as the learning curve. And then the unexpected tragedy of injuries that plagued this team all year long. Pete Warner at linebacker, 80 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 3 passes defense, 2 forced fumbles. He got hurt early on in the season. And he was clearly our MVP at the midway point of the season on defense, and then he got hurt. And then Ellis came in, and Caden Ellis, who might be our second MVP here behind Davis, or could be the MVP for a lot of people for our defense. He finishes with 78 tackles, 7 sacks, 7 tackles for losses, 2 passes defensed, and 2 forced fumbles. Ellis was a force. Ellis is more of a pass rushing. Werner didn't have any sacks, and Ellis had 7. So Ellis spent a lot of time in coverage as well. Werner's really good in coverage. Overall, I think we have 2 great linebackers here. The future of the team. Cam Jordan, 66 tackles, 8.5 sacks. He led the team in sacks with 8.5, 13 tackles for losses, 2 passes defensed, 2 forced fumbles. Pro Bowl numbers from a Pro Bowl player. Cam Jordan is not showing that he needs to be replaced anytime soon. He continues to put up seasons like this. He's got another couple of good seasons in him if he's going to put up numbers like this. So kudos to old man Cam. Marcus May, who missed a lot of time, 60 tackles, 2 passes defensed. Paulson Adebo had 7 passes defensed. He played a lot this season, and he wasn't as good as he was last year. Definitely wasn't as good as he was in preseason and in training camp. But he wasn't bad either, and he had to start the majority of these games. And our passing defense ended up pretty good overall, so can't complain too much about Adebo's performance. Carl Granderson with the big 5.5 sacks, 9 tackles for losses. Great year for Granderson. Shy Tuttle finished with 2 sacks. 5 passes defensed for Shy Tuttle, which is pretty impressive for a defensive tackle. Alontae Taylor finished with a whopping 11 passes defensed. David Onyemata started off so slow that I can't even guarantee that he is still a good player. But he finished so strong, he finishes with 5 sacks. Not terrible. And then Bradley Roby, the last player to have more than 30 tackles, had 5 passes defense, 2 fumble recoveries. He finishes as our slot cornerback, and he did a pretty good job. Now I'm going to pull up these other guys who deserve some mentioning, even though most of it was unspectacular. Marshawn Lattimore, who missed over half the season. He was the only quarterback to have an interception, and he was the only defensive player to score a touchdown. Chris Harris Jr., the guy that went from being on the couch to having to start at multiple positions for the Saints defense, was exposed and burned on a few things as far as coverage goes, but as a veteran, he held up pretty nicely overall, finishing with a sack and 3 passes defense and a forced fumble. Marcus Davenport, who was extremely healthy and only missed a handful of games, didn't get a lot of playing time late in the season because he was just unproductive, and he finishes with a half a sack. That is just awful. By contrast, Passignon, who was a spot player, had 2 sacks. Roach finishes with 1 sack. Daniel Sorensen was forced into a lot of playing time, finishes with 3 passes defensed and 2 interceptions. J.T. Gray had an eye-popping 2.5 sacks in limited play. And Peyton Turner, who everybody says, should have turned the corner and really didn't, still finishes with 5 tackles for a loss and 2 sacks. But overall, not great. So those are the stats, the final stats for our Bless You Boys. I'm going to wrap up this video by saying that I don't think the passing offense was as bad as everyone says. I think it was our lack of creativity and our lack of production in the running game that made the offense suffer just as much as Dalton's inability to get anything going. We did have long, sustained drives. It just culminated in fumbles by Ingram or missed field goals or just burning out in the red zone and having to settle for a field goal because you're not imaginative. There's no motion. There's not enough play action. And not enough of a real production in the running game, to benefit any quarterback. So, yeah, I blame our run defense as much as the offense. I think overall, when it was said and done, we never had our offense clicking with our defense clicking. You get all that working, and this team's not that bad. We were one game away from the playoffs. But that's the positive spin on it. The negative spin on it is, yeah, we do need to be a lot better at the quarterback position as far as making plays, being active, and getting out of pressure. And, can you couple that athleticism with the completion percentage that Dalton gave us, being conservative enough not to turn the ball over? I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. You get a quarterback like that, you got to keep her. So good luck with the Saints. I'm not expecting the Saints to get the answer at quarterback in the near future unless we draft the Manning kid in a couple of years. I expect him to be a difference maker because of the pedigree. So that's where I'm at. I don't care if we draft a young quarterback and he turns out to be average or Jared Goff or something like that, and we ride that for the next 10 years, okay, all right, we'll see what happens. I mean, as long as he can get the ball downfield, doesn't turn it over, and our offense is moving the ball and producing, I'll be happy with that. As far as coaching goes, I'm not happy. I think there needs to be a huge change in the way we do this. If Pete Carmichael's going to get my trust, he's going to have to start doing some things that are necessary to win games and to put the defense you're playing at a disadvantage, like motion and play action, using your best players in the red zone, stuff like that. So there you go. That's my year in review. I'm Joe. Subscribe to Rosenfield 10 for more videos like this. It is the off season, but I will be putting together a few Saints videos in the coming months. But look to other videos as well to be appearing. Go to playlists if you're only interested in the New Orleans Saints, where you will find those videos with ease. And I'll talk to you later. Who dat?